The first Turkish president, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, 1923 to 1938. Part 2. Ataturk did not get along well with General von Falkenhayn and, together with Miralay İsmet Bey, wrote a report to Grand Vizier Talat Pasha regarding the grim situation and lack of adequate resources in the Palestinian front. However, Talat Pasha ignored their observations and refused their suggestion to form a stronger defensive line to the north, in Ottoman Syria in parts of the Beirut Vilayet, Damascus Vilayet, and Aleppo Vilayet, with Turks instead of Germans in command. Following the rejection of his report, Ataturk resigned from the 7th Army and returned to Constantinople. There, he was assigned with the task of accompanying the Crown Prince and future Sultan Mehmed Vahideddin during his train trip to Austria-Hungary and Germany. While in Germany, Ataturk visited the German lines on the Western Front and concluded that the Central Powers would soon lose the war. He did not hesitate to openly express this opinion to Kaiser Wilhelm II and his high-ranking generals in person. During the return trip, he briefly stayed in Carlsbad and Vienna for medical treatment between the 30th of May and the 28th of July 1918. When Mehmed VI became the new Sultan of the Ottoman Empire in July 1918, he called Ataturk to Constantinople, and after several meetings in the months July and August 1918, reassigned him to the command of the 7th Army in Palestine. Ataturk arrived in Aleppo on the 26th of August 1918, then continued south to his headquarters in Nablus. The 7th Army was holding the central sector of the front lines. On the 19th of September, at the beginning of the Battle of Megiddo, the 8th Army was holding the coastal flank but fell apart, and Liman Pasha ordered the 7th Army to withdraw to the north in order to prevent the British from conducting a short envelopment to the Jordan River. The 7th Army retired towards the Jordan River but was destroyed by British aerial bombardment during its retreat from Nablus on the 21st of September 1918. Nevertheless, Ataturk managed to form a defense line to the north of Aleppo. According to Lord Kinross, Ataturk was the only Turkish general in the war who never suffered a defeat. The war ended with the Armistice of Mudros, which was signed on the 30th of October 1918, and all German and Austro-Hungarian troops in the Ottoman Empire were granted ample time to withdraw. On the 31st of October, Ataturk was appointed to the command of the Yildirim Army Group, replacing Lehman von Sanders. Ataturk organized the distribution of weapons to the civilians in Antep in case of a defensive conflict against the invading Allies. Ataturk's last active service in the Ottoman army was organizing the return of the Ottoman troops left behind to the south of the defensive line. In early November 1918, the Yildirim Army Group was officially dissolved, and Ataturk returned to an occupied Constantinople, the Ottoman capital, on the 13th of November 1918. For a period of time, he worked at the headquarters of the Ministry of War Harbiye Nezareti in Constantinople and continued his activities in this city until the 16th of May 1919. Along the established lines of the partitioning of the Ottoman Empire, the Allies' British, Italian, French and Greek forces occupied Anatolia. The occupation of Constantinople, followed by the occupation of Izmir, the two largest Ottoman cities at the time, sparked the establishment of the Turkish national movement and the Turkish War of Independence. At the time of the late Ottoman genocides reportedly committed by the KUP and the declining Ottoman Empire, but now controversial, Ataturk was a member of the KUP, and to that extent, a young Turk, but so had many Arabs, Albanians, Jews, and initially, Armenians and Greeks, as it was then simply an anti-Abdul Hamid movement. As for the actual occurrences of the genocides, Ataturk had since divested from the movement and was serving as a relatively junior lieutenant colonel fighting in Gallipoli and western Thrace during the Armenian genocide. Historical evidence, clarification needed, shows that he was not involved with the killings, and that he later went on to condemn them. One such explicit condemnation was in September 1919, when Ataturk met with the United States Army General James Harbord, the leader of the Harbord Commission into the Genocides, in Chivas. Harbord would later recall that Ataturk told him of his disapproval of the Armenian genocide, and that he had allegedly stated that the massacre and deportation of Armenians was the work of a small committee who had seized power, rather than by the government in actuality. Page needed in 1920, before the Turkish parliament, Ataturk called the genocides a shameful act but did not publicly deny them at that time. Ataturk's relations with Enver Pasha, a key perpetrator of the genocides, has also been controversial but poorly understood. While the two men may have been close at times, Ataturk held a personal dislike of Enver Pasha. He once said to a confidant that Enver Pasha was a dangerous figure who might lead the country to ruin. Whether these atrocities, including the fire, was part of the genocides of Asia Minor's Christian minorities that the Turkish army and government carried out during World War I is unclear. Responsibility remains a contentious debate, and it is unclear if the Turks entered the city with these intentions. Many Turkish apologists argue that the regular Turkish army did not play a role in these events. At the time, Ataturk was commander of the Turkish armed forces and sent a telegram to the Minister of Foreign Affairs Mustafa Kemal that described the official version of events in the city. In the telegram, he alleged the Greek and Armenian minorities had pre-arranged plans to destroy Izmir. There are allegations, by whom? Ataturk chose to do little about the Greek and Armenian victims of the fires caused by Muslim rioters in order to rebuild the city as Turkish-dominated Izmir. Although Ataturk was critical of the Armenian genocide and Kemalists had pledged to prosecute those involved with the genocide, on March 31, 1923, a general amnesty was declared for those who had been convicted of court-martial and by the municipal courts after the defeat of the Ottoman forces. Turkey also refused to deliver those involved with the crimes to the Allies, arguing that it would violate Turkish sovereignty. Some of the war criminals were also invited to the government of the new Turkish Republic. On the 30th of April 1919, Fahri Yaver-i Hazret-i Sariyari, honorary aide-de-camp to His Majesty Sultan with the rank of Merliva, Ataturk was assigned as the inspector of the 9th Army Troops Inspectorate to reorganize what remained of the Ottoman military units and to improve internal security. On the 19th of May 1919, he reached Samsun. His first goal was the establishment of an organized national movement against the occupying forces. In June 1919, he issued the Amasya Circular, declaring the independence of the country was in danger. He resigned from the Ottoman army on the 8th of July, and the Ottoman government issued a warrant for his arrest. But Kazım Karabekir and other military commanders active in eastern Anatolia followed Ataturk's lead and acknowledged him as their leader. On the 4th of September 1919, he assembled a congress in Sivas. Those who opposed the Allies in various provinces in Turkey issued a declaration named Misak-i Milli National Pact. Ataturk was appointed as the head of the executive committee of the Congress, which gave him the legitimacy he needed for his future politics. The last election to the Ottoman Parliament held in December 1919 gave a sweeping majority to candidates of the Association for Defense of Rights for Anatolia and Rumeliya Anadolu ve Rumeli Mudafa-i Hukuk Samiyeti, headed by Ataturk, who himself remained in Angora, now known as Ankara. The fourth and last term of the parliament opened in Constantinople on the 12th of January 1920. It was dissolved by British forces on the 18th of March 1920, shortly after it adopted the Misak-i Milli National Pact. Ataturk called for a national election to establish a new Turkish parliament seated in Angora. The Grand National Assembly (GNA). On the 23rd of April 1920, the GNA opened with Ataturk as the speaker. This act effectively created the situation of diarchy in the country. In May 1920, the power struggle between the two governments led to a death sentence in absentia for Ataturk by the Turkish courts-martial. Halide Edip Atavar and Ali Fuat Sebesoy were also sentenced to death alongside Ataturk. On the 10th of August 1920, the Ottoman Grand Vizier Damat Ferid Pasha signed the Treaty of Sèvres, finalizing plans for the partitioning of the Ottoman Empire, including the regions that Turkish nationals viewed as their heartland. Ataturk insisted on the country's complete independence and the safeguarding of interests of the Turkish majority on Turkish soil. He persuaded the GNA to gather a national army. The GNA army faced the Caliphate army propped up by the Allied occupation forces and had the immediate task of fighting the Armenian forces in the Eastern Front and the Greek forces advancing eastward from Smyrna, today known as Izmir, that they had occupied in May 1919, on the Western Front. The GNA military successes against the Democratic Republic of Armenia in the autumn of 1920 and later against the Greeks were made possible by a steady supply of gold and armaments to the Kemalists from the Russian Bolshevik government from the autumn of 1920 onwards. After a series of battles during the Greco-Turkish War, the Greek army advanced as far as the Sakarya River, just 80 kilometers west of Ankara. On the 5th of August 1921, Ataturk was promoted to commander-in-chief of the forces by the GNA. The ensuing Battle of the Sakarya was fought from the 23rd of August to the 13th of September 1921 and ended with the defeat of the Greeks. After this victory, Ataturk was given the rank of Marshal and the title of Gazi by the Grand National Assembly on the 19th of September 1921. The Allies, ignoring the extent of Ataturk's successes, hoped to impose a modified version of the Treaty of Sèvres as a peace settlement on Angora, but the proposal was rejected. In August 1922, Ataturk launched an all-out attack on the Greek lines at Afyonkarahisar in the Battle of Dumlupınar, and Turkish forces regained control of Izmir on the 9th of September 1922. On the 10th of September 1922, Ataturk sent a telegram to the League of Nations stating that the Turkish population was so worked up that the Ankara government would not be responsible for the ensuing massacres. The Conference of Lausanne began on the 21st of November 1922. Turkey, represented by İsmet İnönü of the GNA, refused any proposal that would compromise Turkish sovereignty, such as the control of Turkish finances, the capitulations, the straits and other issues. Although the conference paused on the 4th of February, it continued after the 23rd of April, mainly focusing on the economic issues. On the 24th of July 1923, the Treaty of Lausanne was signed by the powers with the GNA, thus recognizing the latter as the government of Turkey. On the 29th of October 1923, the Republic of Turkey was proclaimed. Since then, Republic Day has been celebrated as a national holiday on that date. With the establishment of the Republic of Turkey, efforts to modernize the country started. The new government analyzed the institutions and constitutions of Western states such as France, Sweden, Italy, and Switzerland and adapted them to the needs and characteristics of the Turkish nation. Highlighting the public's lack of knowledge regarding Ataturk's intentions, the public cheered, "We are returning to the days of the first caliphs." Ataturk placed Fevzi Çakmak, Kazım Özalp, and İsmet İnönü in political positions where they could institute his reforms. He capitalized on his reputation as an efficient military leader and spent the following years, up until his death in 1938, instituting political, economic, and social reforms. In doing so, he transformed Turkish society from perceiving itself as a Muslim part of a vast empire into a modern, democratic, and secular nation-state. This had a positive influence on human capital because from then on, what mattered at school was science and education. Islam was concentrated in mosques and religious places. Ataturk's driving goal was the complete independence of the country. He clarified his position. By complete independence, we mean of course complete economic, financial, juridical, military, cultural independence and freedom in all matters. Being deprived of independence in any of these is equivalent to the nation and country being deprived of all its independence. He led wide-ranging reforms in social, cultural, and economic aspects, establishing the new republic's backbone of legislative, judicial, and economic structures. Though he was later idealized by some as an originator of sweeping reforms, many of his reformist ideas were already common in Ottoman intellectual circles at the turn of the 20th century and were expressed more openly after the Young Turk Revolution. Ataturk created a banner to mark the changes between the old Ottoman and the new Republican rule. Each change was symbolized as an arrow in this banner. This defining ideology of the Republic of Turkey is referred to as the Six Arrows, or Kemalism. Kemalism is based on Ataturk's conception of realism and pragmatism. The fundamentals of nationalism, populism, and statism were all defined under the Six Arrows. These fundamentals were not new in world politics or, indeed, among the elite of Turkey. What made them unique was that these interrelated fundamentals were explicitly formulated for Turkey's needs. A good example is the definition and application of secularism. The Kemalist secular state significantly differed from predominantly Christian states. Ataturk's private journal entries dated before the establishment of the Republic in 1923 show that he believed in the importance of the sovereignty of the people. In forging the new Republic, the Turkish revolutionaries turned their back on the perceived corruption and decadence of cosmopolitan Constantinople and its Ottoman heritage. For instance, they made Ankara, as Angora has been known in English since 1930, the country's new capital, and reformed the Turkish postal service. Once a provincial town deep in Anatolia, the city was thus turned into the center of the independence movement. Ataturk wanted a direct government by the assembly and visualized a representative democracy, parliamentary sovereignty, where the national parliament would be the ultimate source of power. In the following years, he altered his stance somewhat. The country needed an immense amount of reconstruction, and direct government by the assembly could not survive in such an environment. The revolutionaries faced challenges from the supporters of the old Ottoman regime, and also from the supporters of newer ideologies such as communism and fascism. Ataturk saw the consequences of fascist and communist doctrines in the 1920s and 1930s and rejected both. He prevented the spread into Turkey of the totalitarian party rule which held sway in the Soviet Union, Germany, and Italy. Some perceived his opposition and silencing of these ideologies as a means of eliminating competition. Others believed it was necessary to protect the young Turkish state from succumbing to the instability of new ideologies and competing factions. Under Ataturk, the arrest process known as the 1927 detentions 1927 Tepkifati was launched, and a widespread arrest policy was put in place against the Communist Party of Turkey members. Communist political figures such as Hikmet Kivulsimli, Nazim Hikmet, and Sefik Husnu were tried and sentenced to prison terms. Then, in 1937, a delegation headed by Ataturk decided to censor the writings of Kivulsimli as harmful communist propaganda. The heart of the new republic was the GNA, established during the Turkish War of Independence by Ataturk. The elections were free and used an egalitarian electoral system that was based on a general ballot. Deputies at the GNA served as the voice of Turkish society by expressing its political views and preferences. It had the right to select and control both the government and the prime minister. Initially, it also acted as a legislative power, controlling the executive branch and, if necessary, served as an organ of scrutiny under the Turkish Constitution of 1921. The Turkish Constitution of 1924 set a loose separation of powers between the legislative and the executive organs of the state, whereas the separation of these two within the judiciary system was a strict one. Ataturk, then the president, occupied a dominant position in this political system. The one-party regime was established de facto in 1925 after the adoption of the 1924 Constitution. The only political party of the GNA was the People's Party, founded by Ataturk on the 9th of September 1923. But according to the party culture, the foundation date was the opening day of Shiva's Congress on the 4th of September 1919. On the 10th of November 1924, it was renamed Cumhuriyet Halk Fırkası, or Republican People's Party. The word Fırka was replaced by the word party in 1935. The abolition of the caliphate and other cultural reforms were met with fierce opposition. The conservative elements were not appreciative, and they launched attacks on the Kemalist reformists. This was an important dimension in Ataturk's drive to reform the political system and to promote national sovereignty. By the consensus of the Muslim majority in early centuries, the caliphate was the core political concept of Sunni Islam. Abolishing the sultanate was easier because the survival of the caliphate at the time satisfied the partisans of the sultanate. This produced a split system with the new republic on one side and an Islamic form of government with the caliph on the other side, and Ataturk and Inonu worried that it nourished the expectations that the sovereign would return under the guise of caliph. Caliph Abdülmecid II was elected after the abolition of the Sultanate 1922. The caliph had his own personal treasury and also had a personal service that included military personnel. Ataturk said that there was no religious or political justification for this. He believed that Caliph Abdülmecid II was following in the steps of the sultans in domestic and foreign affairs, accepting of and responding to foreign representatives and reserve officers, and participating in official ceremonies and celebrations. He wanted to integrate the powers of the caliphate into the powers of the GNA. His initial activities began on the 1st of January 1924, when Inonu, Kakmak, and Ozalp consented to the abolition of the caliphate. The caliph made a statement to the effect that he would not interfere with political affairs. On the 1st of March 1924, at the assembly, Ataturk said, "The religion of Islam will be elevated if it will cease to be a political instrument, as had been the case in the past." On the 3rd of March 1924, the caliphate was officially abolished and its powers within Turkey were transferred to the GNA. Other Muslim nations debated the validity of Turkey's unilateral abolition of the caliphate as they decided whether they should confirm the Turkish action or appoint a new caliph. A caliphate conference was held in Cairo in May 1926 and a resolution was passed declaring the caliphate a necessity in Islam, but failed to implement this decision. Two other Islamic conferences were held in Mecca in 1926 and Jerusalem 1931, but failed to reach a consensus. Turkey did not accept the re-establishment of the caliphate and perceived it as an attack to its basic existence. Meanwhile, Ataturk and the reformists continued their own way. I stop at this point today. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring the world's incredible stories. Soon we will publish Part 3. Thank you for watching.